All right, well, thank you everybody for joining. We're going to go ahead and get started so we can keep everybody rolling in and out on time. Thank you for attending this workshop we're doing in partnership with Network Delaware on giving public comment and testimony. So this is hopefully going to be useful for anybody going down to Dover when they come back in session or has been attending any of the committee hearings virtually. But this also should be very applicable to any hearing, whether it be on city or county council, or it is at DENREG hearing for regulations or anything where you need to give testimony or public comment. So we are going to do some introductions, but we'll use the chat function for this instead of muting and unmuting. So go ahead and pop in the chat your name, any organization that you work with, and what you hope to gain today, or why are you here. So I'll start and I'll just say mine aloud. So my name is Dustin Thompson. I work with Delaware United and have been with them actually since late 2015 when we first all started getting together. And I do work with the Sierra Club Delaware chapter as well. And I am here because I like helping people tell their story. So everybody has a story to share and a reason for being at the table on these committee hearings and in various branches of the government. We all have something to bring and something to say. And so I love helping people kind of get that out of them and into these hearings. Yes, honing an effective message. Absolutely. And yes, preparing yourself and getting ready for when they come back in session. There are so many bills that are going to be coming up when they get back that it's going to be really great to have all these people coming down, all of you coming down to testify at these committee hearings, and seeing some wonderful organizations as well. A lot of smart justice folks, some mom demands. Got somebody with like 5 different organizations, and that's great. I think that's most of us activists in Delaware. Great, wonderful. Well, feel free to keep dropping those in there. Love to see it. We're going to go ahead and keep going. So today we'll cover some various different types of testimony. So a type of testimony is essentially kind of when you're thinking about what you want to say, why you're there. That helps kind of guide what type of testimony that you pick. The structures that we're going to go over today are mechanisms to help you deliver that and tell that story in a linear fashion so you don't repeat yourself or double back, but that you're covering every bit of your testimony as effectively as possible in the time that you have. We'll go over some tips for writing that we've used and have helped other people use to form their stories and share their testimony. Some tips for delivery and kind of generally in public speaking. And then we're actually going to have breakout rooms where you'll get to practice putting all that into a 60-second testimony that you can practice with each other. And if you have any questions kind of throughout, you can drop them in the chat. I will save some time after the presentation where people can ask questions. We'll probably just keep to the chat just because we're recording tonight so we can put this up online. So the first thing I want to go over is the types of testimony. And so there are multiple types. We're going to go over 5 today. But the big point is that there's more than one way to tell your story and to present your argument. And so I want to give a kind of an overview of what some of those are. So this is not an exhaustive list, but these are probably the most common that we see being delivered and that we write or help others write. So creative testimony is generally for those, the artistic among us, the poets and the writers that like to get a point across and more of a creative outlet space. So this is the one that some people have the most difficulty with, and also the one that others find the easiest to express themselves. Sometimes sharing stories in an artistic or poetic way can really, I mean, we've seen it be very, very effective. And actually have had some people over the course that I've been participating down in Dover it was so impactful in committee hearing that the legislator will actually bring them onto the floor to do it again. So creative testimony can be very, very impactful if that is the way that you like to deliver things. The personal stories are probably, for better or worse, one of the most impactful ways to testify down in Dover. You have to keep in mind that a lot of these legislators treat personal stories and sort of anecdotal stuff almost right in line with facts and data. So if you were impacted by a policy or by the lack of a policy, sharing that experience can be every bit as effective as delivering statistics and data. And sometimes that works really well in our favor, other times not so much. But the point being that if you have a personal story to share, share that. We've actually written testimony for people that was more kind of data centric. And once the person got into the committee hearing and started hearing what the legislators were saying and what some other individuals that were testifying there were saying, they actually scrapped what we had written for them and delivered their personal story because they realized, oh, wait, this actually has happened to me. And we are never upset about that. Like, that is absolutely the right decision to make. If you have a personal story, share the personal story above all else. Then you have persuasive testimony. This is probably one of the more common forms of or types of testimony that we see being delivered. This is you have maybe a unique argument that hasn't been presented in the media or in the conversations that you've heard around a policy, and you think it's very effective, and you want to deliver that argument in the form of a testimony. Persuasive testimony is probably the most common that we write. And then you have data-driven testimony. So this one can be really good or really bad, depending on how you do it. If you have a couple key data points that you really want to drive home and deliver to legislators, centering your testimony around that data is really, really effective and important, because sometimes they'll actually use those data points that they hear in committee hearing on the floor during the debate. So we have seen that translate very well. The problem can get into the situation when you have too much data, when you're driving home like 18 different points in a 2-minute testimony. So you got to be a little bit cautious on data-driven testimony. And then for the policy wonks among us, questioning testimony comes into play. So this is more for those that really read the legislation and dig into things, but you're seeing that maybe a line item is a little bit problematic, or some of the language you think could be tweaked to make better, or you've seen maybe another state that has done it this way and we're trying to do it another way. So you may call into question why that is, why we're doing it this way and not that. The big thing to keep in mind with questioning testimony going into a hearing, know that you're not going to be able to like question a legislator and get an answer. So you can present a question and kind of ask the committee or the body kind of at large, why is this line item as it is, rather than some other way. But know that in all likelihood, you're not going to get a back and forth with legislators or policymakers. But it's still important because the other legislators maybe didn't think about that. And we've seen amendments be generated based on questioning testimony from everyday citizens that came in and called up a point on a bill and made a really valid argument of why it should be another way. So questioning testimony can be very effective. So the way to kind of pick which type is to ask yourself, why? Why do you want to testify? What do you feel you can bring to the argument, to the conversation, and let that be your guide on which type to select. So writing structures, and this can be a little bit confusing, type and structure can be a little bit confusing. And you have a packet that we sent out ahead of time, an informational packet, and it kind of breaks down the difference between type and structure. But you can intermix, for the most part, different types of testimony with different writing structures. Writing structure is more about what's comfortable to you and what are you experienced in writing, how you write. The big thing is that they keep you moving forward. One of the biggest mistakes that we make is people, or have heard, is that people will double back on their argument. And so they'll, for example, they'll talk about the problem and really hash out the problem. And then they start talking about the solution, the policy, but then they go back to the problem again. And then they'll jump to the end, to the action, right? And so it sounds disorganized. You want to flush out whatever section you're talking about before you move on to the next section. And writing structures will help you do that. So these are 4 that we're going to talk about today, but there are tons of different writing structures out there. These are the ones that we covered in that packet and gave examples on in that packet. And at the bottom, all the way at the end of that document, there's a zip file that you can download all the examples at once rather than doing one at a time if that's what you want to do. So one of my favorite writing structures, and it's probably one of the most effective, particularly for persuasive arguments, but it can be used for personal stories as well, is Monroe's motivated sequence. It's also called the problem solution sequence. So in Monroe's, what you're doing is you're starting out super strong. You use an attention grabber. So it's usually some kind of statistic or the highlight of your personal story, or some quote from a famous person dealing with your policy. It's something to pull people in, something kind of shocking a little bit. It kind of jumpstarts your testimony. And then you go into establishing a need. So you identify a problem, some kind of need that you need to solve. And then you hash that out and move on to satisfying the need. So what it is that you're trying to suggest would be the solution to the problem. So generally the policy that you're there to testify on. And then you visualize the future. So if you did that thing, right, you had this need and then you solved it, what would the future look like? And you paint a picture. And this is why for the artistic among us, this part can be maybe the favorite. So you visualize the future of what happened after you satisfy the need, and then you move into your action. And your end or action in most testimony is always going to be basically the same thing. So whatever the favorable outcome is for you, whether you're there to testify to get a bill out of committee or to stop a bill from getting out of committee, whatever that may be that you're there and to make happen, that's your action or your end. So story structure, I know it sounds like this would only be used for a personal story, but that's not true. You could actually use story structure intermixed with creative writing and persuasive writing as well. So basically, again, you start out with some kind of opener. Could just be introducing yourself and your organization, or it could be some kind of quote or stat. You move into an incident. So we generally see this though with personal stories. So you talk about whatever it is that happened to you or a family member or somebody you know. And then normally when something happens, it's not just like that one thing and then nothing else bad happens. A lot of times when you're talking policy, it's usually systemic in nature. So something bad happened and then a crisis kind of evolved. And so you want to talk about how the domino effect kind of took over after this incident. And it usually reaches some kind of breaking point. So you kind of move into that. And then again, you end with, that is why I'm here to ask you to oppose this bill or support this bill. So make sure that this never happens to anybody else, right? And then you have the formal writing structure. And again, I know this is a lot of information and we'll have time for questions. But the formal writing structure is one that most people are most familiar with. This is the one you used in school when you're writing essays or papers or God forbid, a dissertation. So this is the one that people are most familiar with. You do some introduction and you develop kind of an understanding of the problem, and then develop an understanding of the solution, which is generally the policy. And then you conclude. And again, conclusion is usually whatever it is that you want this body to do. The stylistic writing structure is the only one that you don't really mix in a lot. At creative and stylistic writing, so creative being the type, stylistic being the structure, is generally the go-to for each other. And so this is more or less a lack of structure, but there are still common things. It's more about rhythm and feeling than it is about beginning, middle, and end. And so we gave a great example of creative stylistic writing in the informational packet. Definitely check that out. We annotated all of those examples so you can kind of see what some of those similarities are as you move throughout a creative stylistic structure. So definitely recommend checking that packet out. The big thing is don't panic. Again, this sounds like a lot, but practice makes perfect. Rely on the guides that we put into the informational packet that we sent out. And if you have problems, that is why we are here. We're not just doing this training and then we're never going to be around and you can't contact us. If you need help writing, particularly when you're first getting started, reach out to DU. One of us on the policy team will absolutely help you out, help you in brainstorming or whatever you need. So don't panic. You can do this, I promise. So next I want to get into some of the tips for writing, both before and after you actually start writing. So what you do before you put pen to paper is probably more or at least just as important as what you actually write. One of the big things that we see is people just read the synopsis without doing any kind of dive into the actual policy itself. We definitely recommend that you read the policy before you start writing. Synopses can sound great, and then when you actually look at the language, you realize not so great. So if you're not really a policy wonk, or you're not big or don't have a lot of experience in reading legislation, again, reach out to Delaware United or an organization that is working on that issue. And I'm sure that we would be more than happy, and I'm sure other orgs as well would be more than happy to help kind of walk you through a policy. Or if you look at something that's like 20 pages long, you're like, oh, I can't read all this. I guarantee you, whatever you're working on, there's an organization in Delaware that's working on it too. So if you don't know the org, again, reach out to DU. We work with a lot of organizations in Delaware and can probably get you the right person to talk to. But you want to talk and have those conversations before you start writing. And then again, decide why you want to speak, what you bring to the table, and let that kind of guide your testimony. You want to research before you write, but before you research, you want to pick and brainstorm and pick a couple of questions that you'd like to answer in your testimony. So if you're even if you're writing a personal story, right, you can ask less policy heavy questions like, if I was in front of a legislator that was opposed to this, what would I want to tell them, right? Or if they were in favor of something you opposed, conversely, right? Or how did this incident impact my family? You know how it impacted you because you lived it, but maybe start to think about how did it impact those around you? And that could really help drive your testimony, right? Or if you're doing policy and you have a bill on the minimum wage, maybe your policy question you want to think about is, what are the wages for the states around us, right? Or how is a state that has implemented a $15 minimum wage, how is their small businesses adjusted, right? And then you could go out and research that and use that to help kind of inform your testimony. But whatever you do, you want to do that research first. We've seen people write a beautiful testimony, and then we kind of dig in on one of their points and do the research after and realize that what they're saying actually isn't accurate. So then they have to go back and rewrite, or maybe it's out of date and they need to get a new source that's in date, right? So you want to do all that before you put pen to paper. While you write, you want to make sure that you're not covering too much. Particularly on the data-driven testimony, we see this a lot. Pick a couple stats. If you got 3 minutes, 2. If you got less than 3 minutes, try to go just 1. Pick a point, drive it home, make that effective, because it's much better to not be able to say everything you want and try to scatterbrain your testimony, and then it's not effective at all, than to only be able to touch on one point, but be really effective with it. It's much better to do the latter. When you're writing, and you can do this after you're writing, but don't write in a big block. It just makes it hard to read when you're actually delivering your testimony. What I like to recommend to people is write in blocks of maybe 3, 4 max lines of text. What ends up happening is you'll read in this big paragraph, right? And then you look up at the camera or at your audience and you look back down and you've lost your spot. It's much easier to give yourself a line break to know when to look up. And then when you look back down, you know where you were. So avoid writing large blocks. And then don't be afraid to start over when you're writing. Everybody, not everybody, but it happens quite often that you start to get into your research and you realize what you wanted to say isn't the best thing that you could say. It's not the most persuasive argument. So don't be afraid to get halfway through your testimony in writing and realize that, you know what, there's a better way to phrase this. There's a better argument here, and then start over. Always check your resources. Obviously, you want to make sure you're not referencing papers that are 30 years old and has nothing to do with the current time that we're living in now. And then the worst thing is you submit your testimony and they realize that you quoted a source that is less than reputable, and then your whole argument is kind of thrown in the trash. So you want to make sure that you check your resources as you're writing. And then just watch your word count. So the average person can read, without sounding rushed, about 100 to 150 words a minute. So I always try to aim to underwrite. That way I can take my time when I'm delivering. And if I need to add something, like I hear a comment that one of the legislators made, and I want to like kind of rebuke that in my testimony on the fly, I have that room. So try not to max out your word count. Give yourself a little bit of flexibility. A 3-minute testimony is about 375 to 390 words. So the biggest tip for delivery, and I'm going to keep saying this, you can do this. I promise. It sounds like a lot, but as you practice and you get better and more comfortable, you'll be confident. You're going to be great. I promise you can hammer this out. And that's why you want to practice, practice, practice. What I like to do and what I suggest to other people, and my public speaking teacher taught me back in early college, was to try different inflections when I'm practicing. So try to be like overly dramatic, or try doing weird enunciations and inflections on how I'm pronouncing or saying my testimony, because it kind of programs your brain to be very comfortable when you're actually delivering it correctly. And the overly dramatic is actually a way for those of us that sound like a robot when we read. Practicing in an overly dramatic way can actually make it so when you deliver it in person, you're right where you need to be, the right amount of drama. So that worked really well for me. I'd give it a shot, and it sounds funny. So maybe don't do it in front of your wife because she'll laugh at you, as mine has. But it is very effective. So we put out the committee weekly agenda reports every week on Mondays in our emails, and we put them out on our social media accounts as well. So right when you see those come out, or if you're a policy nerd like me and you check the Legis website routinely every day because you have serious FOMO, and you see a bill that is coming up that you want to testify for, sign up as early as you can. So whether it's that Monday when you see our reports come out, or on Friday when they announce what committees are hearing which bills, sign up right away. You want to get your name early in the queue, particularly for busy bills. And if it is a busy bill, we have 5 to 10 minutes as our kind of rule of thumb. You may actually want to get there even earlier than that. When we had bills like the minimum wage and others that were more popular, cannabis as well, the Zoom account that they use is limited on how many participants. So the earlier you can get there, and this happened with the gun bills as well, the earlier you can get there and be in the waiting room, the better. So that way you know that you're going to have a spot. And then I always recommend, because you never know, like you can reach out to the chair ahead of time to find out how many minutes you're going to have. And I would do so. But if they at the last minute get a huge surge of registrations, they may cut down the time that you have to testify. And so I would recommend that you highlight in your document, whether it's a Google Doc or if it's something that you've written down on paper. I would recommend that you highlight what you're comfortable with cutting. So that way, if need be, you can pull out part of your testimony without having to do it as you read through and it getting confused and frustrated. So something I do and always recommend others to do as well. So when you're at the hearing, the process for the virtual hearings are basically that they will introduce the bill and allow the sponsor of the bill to kind of present on it. They'll kind of give an overview and allow committee members to ask questions and express their feelings. And then it'll go to public comment. So they'll ask you usually to raise your hand. But when it goes to public comment, I generally tell people just preemptively, just raise your hand. That way they know that you're there and that you want to testify. So then they'll ask you to come off of mute. You'll get a little pop-up. Again, this is all just for the virtual world. You'll get a little pop-up that asks you to unmute. Try to be as quick as you can with that. Otherwise, you could shave some seconds off of your time limit. So really be present and aware. Otherwise, they're going to move right on without you. So whenever I'm right before I click that unmute button, take a deep breath in through the nose, out through the mouth. You may be nervous if you have any sort of anxiety. I mean, even I get nervous still when testifying. You're the only one that's going to know that you're nervous. So just deep breath, be confident, you got this. And then be gracious with yourself, be flexible. You may not get everything out that you wanted to get out, right? It's okay. Give yourself the grace, be flexible, and I promise your testimony is going to be good and well received. After you're done testifying, just out of courtesy, lower your hand, same way you raised it, right? You hit the reaction button and you hit raise hand, lower your hand when you're done, so that way the administrator can see the next person in queue. Always email your testimony as a kind of a follow-up. It not only will enter it permanently into the record, which is always good, it also will help the person that's doing the meeting minutes make sure they captured your thoughts accurately. So we put in the info packet that we sent out, there's actually just an email that you email for in the House. In the Senate, they don't have a dedicated email. So you have to contact the chair. And sometimes they'll just say this in the committee hearing, they'll tell you where to email it. But if they don't, reach out to the chair of the committee and you usually email it to them and their aide. And if you're part of an org, I always recommend going back and just checking in with them. Delaware United, for example, we love to hear how things went in committee hearings. If they had any questions regarding your testimony, which doesn't often happen, but it has in the past, or what other people said, or how it went, if the legislators seemed responsive or not to the crowd. So one of the big points that I'd like to make is that sometimes they'll have the camera on and you won't know. Sometimes they won't have the camera on, like they will have your video feed going to the committee and you won't see it. But even beyond that, pretend as if they can see you. If you're slouched down like this and you're delivering testimony, your voice actually reflects your body's posture. Whereas if you're sitting back like this, you're sitting up nice and tall, you got your chest out, your shoulders back, relaxed, you're confident, you're going to project that in your voice. So try to present yourself as if the audience can see you. It does make a difference. So just a quick review. And if you have questions, drop them in the chat. Now's the time. Pick a type of testimony. Let the reason why guide you in your decision on what type to pick. Pick a structure. It doesn't matter what structure you pick. Just some way to make sure that you keep your thoughts moving in a linear fashion and that you don't repeat yourself or double back on your argument. Research and reflect. And this goes whether you're writing data testimony or a personal story. Even if it's a personal story, sometimes research actually is still helpful. If you had something happen to you, or if you're in a sub-minimum wage job, right, for going back to the minimum wage example, it's, yes, share your story, but it's also helpful to intermix some data into your personal story, right, of how others could be impacted in a beneficial way if this bill passes, right? So research and reflect on your argument or your story, and then reach out for help. Delaware United is always, always there to help. We check our email every day, multiple times a day, because I am a millennial and it's always attached to my hip. So don't hesitate to reach out if you need some help. And then practice out loud. Don't practice in your head. When I say practice, 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 I mean verbally say the words, because you might find that when you say what it is that you've written, that you stumble on a phrase because it's not worded in the correct way. And so you'll get caught up on the word and get tongue-tied. And so practice out loud, because you'd be surprised how often you'll bump into that and like, oh no, that doesn't sound the way I want it to sound, or that just doesn't feel right in my mouth, right? And I want to write it a different way. And then follow up after you're done. Follow up with the org, follow up with the chair, maybe with the sponsor. If you're really supportive of a bill, I can't tell you how big of a difference it is to these legislators to hear from you after you've testified. So if you're really passionate about a bill, or you really are appreciative of something one of the committee members said about a policy, follow up with them. Just shoot them an email and say, hey, I really appreciate you bringing up that point. It really does make a big difference. I mean, they're just people, right? And they appreciate that positive reinforcement. The big thing is, yes, this may seem like a lot of information. It may seem overwhelming, but again, and I say it, and I'm going to say it again, you can do this. I promise it'll all be okay. If you've never given testimony before, it can feel a little shaky in the beginning, but after you've done it a couple of times, you're going to feel confident, you're going to feel good about it, and you absolutely have a place in our democracy, and this is a really important place for you to take. So you can do this, you got this. And if you need help, you can email us anytime, Delaware United, the number 4, all@gmail.com. So with that, does anybody have any questions? You can drop them in the chat if you do. So definitely check out I just wanted to reaffirm one more time, like check out the packet that we sent out. The examples the annotated examples that we put together can really be helpful to people. There's some kind of tips that no matter what structure you pick, you want to include certain things. That you always want to introduce yourself first, say the bill number that you're there to testify on, let them know whether you're testifying support or opposition. There's some like basic things that no matter what you're writing, you got to kind of start out with that. So check out that informational packet. And you should be able to both download a version of it and print a version of it. You can't edit the Google Doc that we sent out, but you can copy and paste and save and download and print. So, all right, so the next section, we're actually going to go into breakout rooms. So every room will have a moderator in it that has written testimony before and delivered testimony before. What we're going to do is actually practice writing a 60 to 90 second testimony. So that's about 100 to 175 words. So we didn't kind of preemptively decide what you had to write about. We want everybody to kind of pick what they're passionate about and write on that. And so the moderators are going to help you kind of brainstorm some of those policy or reflection questions, maybe brainstorm what issue you want to cover, what kind of stuff you want to be Googling, what are some good resources, all that kind of stuff. So, and then we'll actually practice kind of delivering the testimony. So we'll take turns delivering the testimony and getting feedback on how that went, things that went really well, things that maybe to consider for next time. And then I want to come back and hear how that went and answer any questions or problems that came up during that process. So we always find that when we're doing these educational trainings, that join is a really great way to kind of cement what we've talked about here in the presentation. So with that in mind, why don't we go ahead and open up the breakout rooms. And are you able to do that?
Yep, I just want to make sure everybody's assigned. Yep, okay, I'll do that now.
So I'm going to allow people to unmute themselves though, so that way you can talk with.
And
one
did you make Kobe a host? A co-host?
Yes, let me find Kobe. There you are. All right, there you go. Good to go.
Okay, just give me one sec.
So Anne asked what email we send questions to. So if you have questions for the training, you can email just Delaware United for all at gmail.com. Remember, it's the number 4. If it's questions for legislators, there is a House and Senate general email that you can send those to. And I didn't think about it, but I will actually add that to the informational packet. If you printed that out, the link won't expire, won't go anywhere. So as I add stuff to that packet, like those emails, it will be in there for you.
All right, I'll open the breakout rooms now.
Thank you.